All right, my friends, now that we've covered all the alternative media that I'm proud enough and lucky enough to be involved with, groundzeromedia.org, corbettreport.com, tragedyandhope.com, on and on and on. That's all I got to say. And again, just after an amazing year where the site has grown more than, I would have anticipated, is thanks in no small part to that huge group of great alternative media folks. So now that we've covered all of those, let's now shift gears into a couple of my own home run sister alternative media outlets. And let's blast through all the latest from foodworldorder.com. But first, let's look at cyberspacewar.com. And again, my man Alan in Omaha has been posting so much, there's no way I can go into any amount of amazing detail here on cyberspacewar.com. But let's just scroll down the page, follow the bouncing ball, my friends, and such in all of these cases. As I say time and time again, it's up to you to go do more research for yourself. So posted most recently to cyberspacewar.com is a quick article on Alternative 3, a strange little mockumentary film you may or may not have heard of before. Interestingly enough, they did show it when I was at the 10th Annual Conspiracy Conference. It was one of the little late-night gatherings. Basically, it was a British show broadcast, I think, just once or twice in June of 1977, and it is about Alternative 3 being evacuating the Earth. And as we see, this article goes into Site R and Alternative 1 and Alternative 2 and Edward Teller and the Svalbard Seed Vault and perhaps the Denver Airport. Alternative 1 would be to fix the atmosphere. Alternative 2 would be go down into the Earth, so that would be Site R, the Seed Vault, the old Greenbrier bunker in the resort of White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, and even the New World Airport, sometimes known as the Denver Airport. So that's Alternative 3. We also have the Mystery Hexagon of Saturn getting into Voyager 1 in 1979, and there is a video you can check out called the Mystery Hexagon of Saturn. But let's break down my 1231 DEF CON High Chance Top Threats and the Cloud, where KPSPLocal2.com gets into the top cyber threats of 2001, and I think you probably know what they are without me even kind of going into all of it. Living with our heads in the clouds, or rather forcing everyone to live with their heads in the cloud, that the cloud being the place where the internet is going, when you won't need any software or anything on your computer, you won't have your hands on any of it because people smarter and richer than you will be able to take care of it. The one and only Paul Allen, philanthropist of the Pacific Northwest. You can't go really anywhere without seeing his name on museums and buildings and things. He was also a Microsoft co-founder, but he is working on a massive patent mega suit, and you can get more on that from arstechnica.com, suing every Google, Apple, Microsoft, all of them. Speaking of lawsuits, Apple sued for app privacy violations. More on that from thehill.com. Man quit his job because he hated spam so much, went to law school, and now sues spammers. That sounds like something you'd see in a cartoon where a mouse wants to dun, 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 and they go through school really quick and learn how to be an engineer so they can drive over Scratchy on the train tracks. But anyway. With his 15 minutes of fame ticking, Julian Assange has signed $1.5 million worth of book deals. More on that from Raw Story and ZeroHedge.com. Smith, that's Vaughn Smith, Julian Assange, George Soros, and claims that Assange is helping the neocons, and that's again something we get into in the Red Ice interview, whether or not they know what they're doing, whether they're patsies, whether they're cutouts, and what kind of intelligence operation this may be. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter because they're going to use it to crack down on the web, but interesting claim from Mr. Assange where he notes there'd be a high chance he'd be killed like Jack Ruby. High chance I'd be killed Jack Ruby style in a U.S. prison. The theory being Jack Ruby was injected with a fast-acting cancer in prison. Our last note is a documentary series from Josh Reeves of The Global Reality. This is Reality of Illusion Part 4, getting into Julian Assange, the White Brotherhood, and the Nazis. All of that and more, again, we got into on the Red Ice interview. Zombie satellite is alive. Intelsat's Galaxy 15 communication satellite, after drifting in orbit since last April, has been revived. You can find more on that from intelsat.com. You can also check out the International Space Station's moon transit, and there it is. You can see it on the surface of the moon. We also have, as we mentioned, as we cover on the latest NewWorldNextWeek.com, episode 2010, The Year the Internet Went to War, and that's an article from Threat Level that gets into, of course, all the other big cyber stories. And one we didn't mention, of course, that's worth mentioning. And as I thought about the way to wrap up this year and thinking about some kind of year in review, and there's just no way you can do any kind of comprehensive look back. And that's generally a lot of the times the way I've done other work is don't spend too much time in the past. Just always keep moving forward and making new pieces of media. But the Pennsylvania webcam Spygate story, I think, is a large one that Threat Level doesn't mention here. But, of course, they go on to say that WikiLeaks is the biggest, without a doubt, development in the world of Threat Level. And I would say Threat Level online and Threat Level everywhere. Of course, Germany getting into the Cybercom Act as well, Cyber Warfare Center coming, more on that from the CBC. Why the moon appears gray from Earth in a little film called Moon Rising, again, that you can watch on YouTube, 8-minute video, why the moon appears gray from Earth. Getting into your solar cast, getting into CIA intel programming, perhaps veering off of the cyberspace war setup, but not veering far away is Kubrick's Odyssey, the Apollo 11 faked moon landing, ? And again, these are things I don't really dive into so much myself, and that's one of the reasons why it's great to have another person posting to cyberspacewar.com. They can get into things that I maybe wouldn't put up, but that I know nonetheless are fascinating and interesting, not only to myself, but a lot of other folks out there. Operation High Jump, getting into a little history mystery of the late 40s, of course, when a lot of things were going down. Incident at Kearney, Nebraska, going back to 57. That, I'll just say, I'm glad that Alan is posting so much kind of historical background kind of information. We want to touch on net neutrality ruling by the FCC. Internet splits in two, and we'll get into that in just a few moments. We've got last week's 1223 DEF CON spectacles and seizures, the WikiLeaks spectacle, Apple bans lame WikiLeaks app, DHS seized domains based on bad evidence. Surprise, surprise. More on that from Slashdot. And lastly, New Zealand military releases UFO files. Again, more on that from Raw Story. An interesting article from Activist Post asking whether or not the establishment is preparing to unveil aliens. And I even saw something, I believe it was on beforeitsnews.com, making the prediction that Obama will very soon, like in the next just few weeks, will make some sort of off-the-cuff remark about, oh yeah, and the communications we've gotten from unidentified flying objects and beings not of this earth. Next question. It'll be like that. The Mexico City UFO. We've got the Espionage Act and Naomi Wolf. We've got the UFO crash at Aztec, New Mexico in 1948. And we had our own amazing little event recently, my friends, on December 21st. It was the winter solstice, but it was also a lunar eclipse. And you can see amazing photos taken all around the world, thanks to, among others, universetoday.com. And it was, of course, too cloudy here in the dreary climes of the Pacific Northwest, which it's nice and sunny today, but it's cold, baby. Rendlesham revealed a UFO special from the BBC. More on the lunar eclipse. And again, the questions of what happens out in space, of course, affects us in our inner space. An article from Zen Gardner on, again, beforeitsnews.com, is the moon an artificial satellite? That would be something possibly that we would hear as some kind of, just as Werner von Braun said in our Operation Paperclip Nazis, the way they'll disclose this kind of information son of Stuxnet. Of course, the Stuxnet virus rages on. And speaking of the Nazis, did the Vril Society depart for Aldebaran in 1945? I know this sounds like Star Wars craziness, but at a Ground Zero lounge from a man, Clyde Lewis of GroundZeroMedia.org, got into the Vril and the Third Reich connections to some of the earliest UFO sightings and some of the strange things that swirl around that. More info, again, on our winter solstice and lunar eclipse. And our final note here on cyberspacewar.com, blended threats, thoughts on security in an uncivilized world. And I guess that would bring us back to one of the first things that we mentioned here, my friends, and that would be on the high chance top threats in the cloud, the top cyber threats of 2011. Oh, my goodness. So again, huge thanks to Alan in Omaha for posting and editing cyberspacewar.com. I have to do very little for it now because now it's pretty much kind of running itself. Ultimately, that's what I'd love to do with the media monarchy miniature empire, is to get folks helping out on things that I've set up that, again, I can just kind of act as an editor, and you guys can use it as your sandbox and start to spread this information out to your connections and your communities. So in that vein, again, we want to mention MediaMonarchy@gmail.com if you're interested in getting involved, if you've got a little bit of web expertise. It doesn't take a whole hell of a lot. If you're familiar with Blogger, that's basically what I use. We just buy the .com domain name and tell it to point over to the Blogger site. And again, that's a way to keep things cheap. So quickly now, let's hop over to our other sister site that's turning, again, more and more into one of the forgotten one, and that's foodworldorder.com for some of our latest here, and we'll run down quickly our New Year's Eve binge and purge prices, crisis, and New Year's predictions. Global food prices in 2011 face perilous rise. That's from the New York Times. Inflation may become a bigger worry in 2010 for food companies. That's from livemint.com. Food stamps to be spread out in 2011. Michigan to change its food stamp distribution policy in 2011. That's from publicbroadcasting.net and Detroit News. We've got the foodsafetynews.com naughty list for 2010, and from Natural News noting that the food safety bill that they wrangled and wiggled and moved and dodged and weaved and shoved down our throats, the U.S. government's basically going to spend $1 million per person to prevent foodborne illness deaths. Hundreds of herbal products to be outlawed across the European Union in early 2011, again thanks to the international Codex Alimentarius implementations. WikiLeaks cables reveal U.S. conspire to retaliate against European nations if they resisted GMOs. UN, again the UN, concerned about food safety activists. Oh, homegrown terrorists. I guess that puts the groan in homegrown terrorist. Ha ha ha. Hershey's brings non-GMO confections to Europe, but not the U.S. Monsanto's neotame molecule allowed in USDA-certified organic foods. And we've got the update on the massive Salmonella sprouts outbreak, 94 ill in 16 states, including the District of Criminals. There's also a hepatitis A outbreak in West Virginia. 11 people confirmed ill. More on that from foodpoisonjournal.com. And here in my current town of Portland, Oregon, from Food Safety, Portland food detectives crack E. coli mystery and finger Sally Jackson cheese. And that's not nearly as much fun as it may sound. We have the printed future of Christmas dinner, a bizarre story from the BBC, like something out of Back to the Future 2, where they put their little nanoparticles in the thing and it turns into a pizza. Our last note on this DEF CON is referring to the paranoia about terrorists poisoning the food supply over the holidays, and they were going to use dogs, and they're going to put bombs in Christmas presents, and we're going to hear about putting bombs in thermoses, but they were going to poison the food supply. However, they should just save their time because the international food conglomerations have pretty much already poisoned the food supply. More on that from naturalnews.com. Quickly, the rest on foodworldorder.com. City of Houston shuts down 2 radioactive water wells. A follow-up on our A&P bankruptcy story, 1,000-plus layoffs possible after their bankruptcy. More on that from Press of Atlantic City. We've got the 1223 binge and purge with the food safety bill. Again, that terror attack, Al-Qaeda, save the children, switching from soda tax to Coke and Pepsi. And finally, hexavalent chromium found in drinking water of 31 cities. That, my friends, is foodworldorder.com.